this is the session on evaluation criteria for consortia support of open organizations and initiatives. So if this isn't where you want to be, then you can leave now. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to this panel today. I'm Silke Davison, and I'm one of the community managers for the OAPEN Foundation and DOAB, the Directory of Open Access Books. I will share a little bit more about that, but first I would like to introduce you to the panel. Jesse Holden from Orbis Cascade, Zhenya O'Gara from the Virginia Academic Library Consortium, and Maurice York from Big Ten. So I will let them give a little introduction themselves. Maurice?
Okay. Thanks, Morris. Well, hi, I'm Zhenya O'Gara. I'm from VIVA, which is Virginia's Academic Library Consortium. We represent we now represent 70 institutions. There was a merger of academic libraries in Virginia. This includes a wide variety of library types. So we have a number of large research institutions. We have a community college system of 24 community college libraries. We have a number of four-year comprehensives, and then we have a little over 30 private nonprofit academic library institutions that are our members too. So I give you that context in advance of this conversation because when we're talking about supporting open infrastructure, the needs and goals of all of those institutions necessarily vary pretty widely. So I will turn it over to Jesse.
All right, I got a lot of microphones. I'm Jesse Holden. I am the program manager for shared content and scholarly communication at the Orbis Cascade Alliance. Orbis Cascade is a consortium in the Pacific Northwest, mostly in Oregon and Washington and Moscow, Idaho. We have 38 members, and like Viva, they're mixed type academics, so everything from large R1s, regional comprehensive, small private liberal arts, and community colleges across the states.
Excellent. Good afternoon. I'm Maurice York. I'm the Director of Library Initiatives for the Big Ten Academic Alliance. We are 19 R1 universities now spread from coast to coast, so all the way from University of Maryland and Rutgers in the east out to UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon in the west. So Jesse and I actually now share a member. And this is kind of in the spirit of the conversation we're going to have today. And we were talking last night, consortia are not actually in competition with each other. We are actually great partners. We all have different strengths. And it's when we look at what we can do at the networks of networks scale that our real power comes in. So Big Ten Academic Alliance, we're engaged in a wide range of initiatives as all consortia. But one of the places that we have especially been focusing on over the last 4 years is our open access and open infrastructure initiatives, which we include under the rubric of open publishing. So that is me, and I guess that's all of us. So.
Thank you. And maybe a little bit of context as well, why I've brought these three brilliant people together is because they all are supporters of OAPEN and DOAB, and which we are very grateful for, and it will be great to hear from them today. So just to let you know a little bit about how the structure of this session is going to go, I'll give a brief introduction, and then we'll have the main part of the session will be a discussion with these three. We'll have about 25 minutes for that, and there are 5 questions that we'll be addressing. And then at the end, there's going to be hopefully about 10 minutes where you guys can ask questions. And yeah, we'll have a bit of more audience participation. So just a little bit more about us. We're 2 open infrastructure services for open access books. OAPEN consists of the OAPEN Library, which hosts full text of open access books. We have around 37,000 open access books at the moment. The Directory of Open Access Books is an indexing service for open access books. So we just point to where you can find the full text of an open access book. and we have around 88,000 records. And so our missions are twofold and collective, I think it's fair to say, is to increase the discoverability of peer-reviewed open access books, and also be industry standard to promote and build trust in open access book publishing, to be a trusted source for people to find out more information about open access books and book publishers as well. We're independent organizations, we're not for profit, and we also cannot be sold or acquired by anybody else. So the only option would be to cease to exist. Otherwise, but hopefully that will never happen. We also adhere to the principles of open scholarly infrastructure, the POSI principles. And as part of this, we conducted self-audits, which are publicly available on our websites. And we will also be reviewing these next year as part of our strategy plans. And we serve stakeholders from all over the publishing industry, so publishers, funders, libraries, and researchers. Our primary stakeholder group is libraries, and we do a lot of engagement in the library community, not just with our supporters, but also with libraries on a global scale as well. And I just think it's important to emphasize, and this is a nice slogan that our friends at COPIM like to use, that there's no open access without open infrastructure, and so hopefully we'll be able to show you that today in this discussion. I put a poll on the event page, and I thought it would be interesting to share the results of this poll. Just briefly, I asked people, do they have an evaluation criteria already that they use to evaluate initiatives? And actually, it's changed quite a lot from even just yesterday. It was quite even split. Half of respondents said yes, and half of them said no. But now you can see that there's a few more, 19 out of 34, don't have a criteria or a policy that they use to evaluate open initiatives, and 15 do. So these might be some of your responses. Okay, so we will move on to the interesting part, the part you've probably all been waiting for, which is the questions. And so the first question is, how and why did you choose to support OAPEN and DOAB? So, Zhenya, please.
I thought we were going to go the other way, and I would get to go third. So at VIVA, we have been supporting open initiatives for a pretty long time, starting in 2014 and 2016, but it really wasn't until 2020 where the steering committee asked us to formalize our approach in terms of considering what are we going to support, how are we going to support it, what does the consortium want to be doing with open access initiatives, kind of broadly writ, or open publishing, as Morris said, kind of broadly writ. And one of the things that came out of that, which I'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about kind of how do you make your decisions, is that what we found from the consortium in how they value open access is that there was a strong push to make sure that in addition to doing subscribe to open and read and publish and other deals like that, that we were also doing Diamond OA, and that we were really supporting open infrastructure in ways that made sense for the consortium. OAPEN is an open infrastructure that we support, I believe, my memory is real faulty this last couple of years, but I believe that several of our members had already been supporters of OAPEN. We have an open access advisory group who had brought it forward and had asked that it be considered. So the way the structure works in our organization is the Open Access Advisory Committee reviews things that are either brought to them or that they bring forward, and then make recommendations to the Collections Committee, which is where the funding is for these different types of initiatives. So that's kind of the pathway that OAPEN took. One of the things that our members it is hard for our members to participate in membership organizations. And so when we can figure out a pathway for consortial support and for members to support through the consortium, it gives them more options. Members that might not have been supporting open infrastructure have the option. And so that was really attractive about OAPEN too for our members. So that's how we kind of became aware of it. I don't know which microphone you want to use.
My choice. All right. Orbis Cascade had a strategic plan in 2018 that shockingly did not include any provision for open access. There was still interest across the consortium, and we were able to address it somewhat through subscriptions, but because of our mixed type and multi-state structure, these were opt-in and relatively contingent agreements. In 2023, we launched a new strategic plan that specifically addressed open access. In fact, the strategic initiative was leverage open content and practices to support educational equity and member sustainability. And this became kind of a broad initiative that did incorporate open access publishing for our consortial members. The one program that we do have centrally funded is our ebook program. It's unique in the consortium, and that was the place that we could really bring the entire consortium together for support. And we looked at a number of different monograph initiatives and decided to go with OAPEN because it did provide broad-based infrastructure support and seemed to be the most logical place to start rather than a particular subject collection or publisher. It was kind of a chance to, if we build it, then the open monographs will hopefully follow. So it's perceived to be a first step. We're deciding what happens next, but OAPEN was a really logical place for us to start our whole consortial engagement with open.
Yeah, awesome. I'm realizing, Jesse, I think I said we share a member. I think we actually share a couple.
Two members.
Our story with OAPEN and DOAB probably goes back to about 2021, I think. And at the time, we were making our first inroads into our open scholarship strategy. So we had built out 6 elements of that strategy, and we were starting to really just like making investments to start to, pursue those. So there were 2 of them in particular that came into play. One was that we have a strategy for strengthening academy-owned knowledge, and particularly university presses was where we were active. And another one, we were building a portfolio of open, sustainable governance models. And as we all know, is like the open future is not here yet. None of us are prophets. We don't know what it looked like. So that strategy was particularly focused on, well, we need to invest in as many as possible, because what we know will perhaps happen is if we didn't, they would collapse before they even had a chance. So that was really the focus of that strategy. Now, DOAB and OAPEN fit very nicely into that, because as we were starting that, building that portfolio of open infrastructures, and we are firm believers in no open access without open infrastructure. All kinds of things can happen if you don't have both. As we were building that portfolio, which as we started up included things like DOAJ, Open Library of the Humanities, Open OA Switchboard is in there, and things like that. DOAB and OAPEN were one of the first ones that we had in there. And as all consortia were focused on, is like, well, we invest in things that we believe in, but also that return value to our members. And what we have seen over the course of the 3 years now that we've been supporting DOAB is a very significant degree of usage and benefit that are occurring to the members. So that's one of the important things about us for us about that portfolio of open infrastructure is the analytics and the ability to have insight into that, into how they're used and how they're succeeding. And very pleased to be able to report today that DOAB and OAPEN are one of those that we see having significant impact and value for our members. And for those components of the strategy where we're particularly looking at monographs, at academy-owned infrastructure, at university presses, and what we're able to do in that space. So.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like this decision was quite early on when you were, rethinking your strategic development as well. So I wonder how. So the next question is, what's your consortium's approach to prioritizing which initiatives to support? And I guess it's been a few years now. Maybe you can think more about how has that sort of developed since you first made the decision to support someone like, two organizations like OAPEN and DOAB, especially because there's such a growing need to support infrastructures and a growing number of open infrastructures as well that need support. So, Maurice, would you like to start this? No, actually, maybe Jesse should start because I'll mix it up.
Thank you.
All right, so the approach to support, like I mentioned, most of our subscription-based agreements are opt-in, so it's fairly democratic, member-driven. The central support for our ebook program follows a very different structure. We do have a member-based standing group, our creatively named ebook standing group, which has oversight of the program. Up until 2023, it had 4 different separate plans in it, 3 of them being ebook plans and 1 of them logically being a streaming media plan. Once that group had a new sort of strategic imperative coming out of the new plan, they went to the drawing board, as it were. I'm a member of that group, and looked at really how we can achieve our strategic goals. And again, looking at OAPEN as an initiative to support. We considered some other ones, but there is a sort of tension because our ebook program provides broad-based monograph access to our members. So one of the criteria that we have to contend with is balancing the amount of content that we're able to provide in terms of commercial publications that many of our members have become reliant on, and how we transition that to open access support. So that's really the process. As I mentioned, we're at a pretty early stage with open access being identified, I think relatively late as a strong but committed priority for the consortium. Who's next?
I don't know.
I'll go. So I'll take a bit of a winding route into this question, so thank you for your indulgence as I ramble. There are a few ways that we evaluate, and I'd say we've been constantly learning over the last 3 years. So some of my thoughts are about where we were 3 years ago, and some are like where we are today and things like that. So one of the things that we always look for is like good partners and good actors. So that's a super abstract thing. We don't have a rubric for that. But when we look at DOAB and OAPEN, when we look at DOAJ, when we look at OLH, we know it, right? So that's one of the things that is foremost on our minds. Underneath that, we have to be able to meet what we think is a pretty high bar of providing value to our members. That's why we're here. We're a membership organization. We work for the members. And we are not a public good, charity, right? So we don't give away money. We invest in things of great importance. So this leads to kind of an interesting question that I think we have like broadly in the space is like, so how do we pick those good partners and good actors? How do we pick the ones that are going to return value to the space? How do we, sort of forecast where this is all going and how things are going to fit together? Because one thing that is also true about the open infrastructure space is that the parts don't fit together very nicely. And it often takes a lot of resources and a lot of time to make them work together. So one of the things that we noticed after a little while of starting these investments and building this portfolio that I was talking about was that SCOS was making a number of recommendations that we happened to pick up the same organizations. Now, we didn't look to SCOS and say, hey, what are you recommending? Where should we go with these investments? It was more like we were running through and building that portfolio, and they said, oh, you know what? They actually kind of line up with that, right? So that was very interesting to us, right? And so now, and this is a little background, there are conversations among the consortia that say, how might we do this at scale, right? And we have a number of consortia getting together right now, and particularly with Invest in Open Infrastructure, to say, how might we form a research project? To say, what's the role of consortia in supporting open infrastructure? And how do we do that? This, I guess, is where I'm taking this arc, is like, we started with our ideals, right? Good partners, good actors. We moved towards value to the members, which is why we have jobs and why we're here. Then we moved into acting at scale, and how do we build up this base of infrastructure that we see as absolutely crucial to what we're doing in our broader open publishing and open scholarship strategies. So I guess I would leave there as a bookmark as watch this space, because I think some really cool stuff is going to come that we get a little more sophisticated about how we coordinate with each other and how we talk to each other about how we lift the whole open space.
That was great. Yes, well, let's do that. I think the only thing I would add to what they have said in terms of how our consortium supports it, we're going to talk, I think, in a minute about kind of overarching of how you evaluate things, so I don't want to get into that too much, but one of the things that the Open Access Advisory Group has been particularly focused on this last year or two, which was not necessarily true when we first started, was open monographs. And that there is a lot that is kind of calcified in terms of the open options in the journal space in ways that it feels a lot more fluid still, both for infrastructure and for ebooks in the monograph space. And I think because of that, especially this last couple of years, the Open Access Advisory Group has really wanted to take a closer look at open infrastructure for monographs and OA monograph models in particular as spaces where there is still room to grow and support the academy and the users in ways that are, not, calcified is the wrong word, but they aren't as kind of set yet, that there still feels like there is room there. And so that was a huge part of their wanting to support OAPEN, I think, in this, how do we prioritize, at least in the last couple of years. And so they keep kind of doing that check in terms of where are the areas where we still think as libraries we can influence the ways the community is developing the infrastructure and the resources. So.
Thank you, that's really fascinating. So yeah, the next question that Zhenya alluded to was about if each of these consortia have a specific framework to make the decisions. I feel like, Maurice, you sort of answered this already anyway, but if you would like to add anything.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and this one I might glance over to, so Kate is here. Kate is our program director for open publishing. I was like, Kate, do we? So, no, I'm kidding. We have a very sophisticated framework. It's excellent. Really, what the decisions about where we invest are in the hands of our members. We run a central investment program that was really designed probably just over 10 years ago and was primarily directed, which I say with affection, around a buying club model, right? It's toward back files, towards purchases of content, towards what could we buy together that makes it cheaper for all of us. A very powerful program. About 2-3 years ago, the question started coming in as like, how might we pivot that program towards making a broader set of investments rather than simply directed at content? We still do that, right? But increasingly into that has come the question about what are the investments that we can make in open infrastructure and in open access. And Kate has been working extensively with that program, and we have a collection development officers group, which is representatives from every one of our members. That group has a subgroup, we call it our collective investment program, that looks at these kind of opportunities. And Kate has been working with that group quite a bit to say we need to develop, become more sophisticated about the rubrics that we have, about the criteria that we're evaluating these on, because really it is up to that small advisory group to make recommendations to the entire group of members. So we have to have a really solid foundation under that. And we need to spell out a number of things. And actually, Kate has been diving really deeply into, well, it's one set of criteria when we're looking at content, but it's a very different set of criteria when we're looking at open access and open infrastructure. And we need to be able to have a sophisticated conversation about those differences. And we need to be aware when we're in one space and when we switch channels and we're over in another space and we're doing a different kind of thinking. And it's very important for us to express that thinking because we are all very busy people, right? And when we ask people to make sudden channel switches for something that they dial into once a month or once every 6 months, we need to be very clear and help with that, a quick orientation to the subject as well as the thinking, and be very clear about how it's structured. So that's really the kind of I hate the governance word. The kind of the structure that we use underneath these decisions and kind of the framework we're using.
We have a variety of criteria that the Open Access Advisory Committee uses to think about whether or not this is a model that meets our goals. They developed a series of umbrella values. If anyone works with VIVA or knows VIVA, we really like to make frameworks, so we have a lot of them. But this one is how they decide whether or not something makes sense for us to support in this space. They look at, is it equitable? And by that, they really mean, does it include kind of an inclusive consortial approach? So we want to make sure that both our research-intensive and non-research institutions have level access to publishing or to the support or whatever it is. Is it sustainable? Do we have ways within the agreement, if it's a read and publish agreement, is there a way to control APC? Is like, how do we support smaller independent OA publishers? Are there additional costs, including administrative costs for our very small, excuse me, central, losing my voice, for a very small central office? There's only a couple of us, so it can't be so unmanageable that we can't do it, because that is a huge burden. The model has to be transparent. I have to be able to explain it to my members easily. It cannot be confusing. It has to be straightforward, and it has to be open. And then the two that I think really support the work that we get to do with OAPEN and DOAB is that we have a mandate that they really want us to be open to experimentation and speculative models. We think it's a rapidly shifting space, and kind of like Maura said, we want to make sure we're supporting new and different models that are aligned with VIVA's interests. And we want to support across models. So another one of the values is making sure that we are supporting a wide variety of open models across formats and infrastructure. And that kind of gives us, because of those values, it's very easy to see where OAPEN and DOAB and infrastructure programs like that fit for the consortium.
And ours was slightly less formal. We coming in rather late with a very general approach to open access. We didn't really have a framework, but we had a group tasked with doing something innovative and bold. So looking out at what is rightly identified as a rapidly changing and in many cases largely experimental sort of landscape, the group really looked at what was available, compared that to the strategic initiatives, then our organization's mission, vision, and values, to see what would be a promising direction and really something that took us in a completely new direction. Historically, the ebook program has been innovative. It launched a DDA program for the consortium in 2011 and had gone through many different iterations. It had been relatively stable through the pandemic, and we were looking for a new direction that was supportive of our new strategic goals and also supportive of our mission. So having looked at that, really there was nothing else like OAPEN. It was a really new and, again, broad-based direction that we could support and that we felt reflected our entire membership in its participation. And really, it's a proof of concept for us. Going forward, there are hopefully lessons to be learned, but also just a kind of inclusivity of our membership for supporting broad-based open access across the academic landscape.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we have like less than 10 minutes. This is just flying by, and there's so much to say, I think. We do still have 2 questions left. Would you rather that we prioritize one question over the next so that we can get audience questions, or shall we just do the questions? Do the questions? Yeah.
Should we see if there's questions from the audience?
Yeah.
In the time that we have.
Does anybody have any questions so far that are burning? Okay. Maybe if I'll share the 2 questions we have, and perhaps you might have questions that relate to these anyway. So the next question is about challenges, choosing who and what to support. I think some you can infer from what you've already said, some of the challenges. And then the last question, or it's more like 2-part question, is about the importance of supporting not-for-profit, community-led, community-driven initiatives, and risks if we stop supporting open infrastructures. So these are also things I think to think about anyway, as parts of when you're evaluating what to support. But questions? Anybody? This lady in the front. Can you please tell us who you are and where you're from as well, if you don't mind? Thank you.
I'm Mina Ranke. So I have a question. A lot of this discussion has been in terms of purchasing. Could any of you address it in the context of a shared services model? So the consortium as providing like expertise, workflows, or access to something with economies of scale, like a piece of software.
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. So I think, for the Big Ten Academic Alliance, our origins and our expertise are in content. And as you all know, libraries, as you may know, research libraries and academic libraries generally have an exception carved out for their purchasing, which is centered around content. Which is kind of why we thrived as the Big Ten Academic Alliance. All of us are making a pivot from content into services. So I think the question you're asking is really important. And our experience with negotiating and building contracts around content goes back probably 20 years. Our experience with service contracts goes back, I bet next year we're going to get really good at it. While I think we're probably in the midst of saying that experience in content and the open area, we're kind of like drawing some bridges there and saying there's some avenues into that investment. I think the question you're asking is really where we need to go, is how do we translate this into the realm of services as a place where we don't, like I say, Big Ten Academic Alliance don't have as much experience, and so it is more expedient and more productive for us to move through a content lens right now.
For us, there are a couple of really tangible service pieces that we wanted to implement. The first is our consortium has a shared Ex Libris Alma/Primo environment, and through that system, through the community zone, we're able to activate the records from DOAB. DOAB also provides a vetting service for the open access ebooks so that it just provides a level of insurance that it's high quality monographic content. And I think even more than that, by creating and sustaining, hopefully, this open infrastructure, it's paving the way for what we anticipate will be future investments in open access collections. We decided to start with the infrastructure piece to make sure that that's broad-based service was there as a foundation so that we had something to build on when we went with more narrow-focused, specific collections in the future.
I will just add that there is metadata and usage statistics that are part of what OAPEN and DOAB can do, and from the consortial level, having high quality monographs that have usage statistics that are open for everyone in Virginia, and then we can show how they're being used, is something that we prioritize, because then we see how the community is valuing or not valuing a shared service like this. I hope that answers your question.
Another question over there, and then one at the back. Hopefully we have time for those two.